Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two of our regular guests. On this side of me we have Andrew Wilson from the All Under One Banner organisation. Andrew, how are you?
Kenny, good evening. I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm not bad. And on the other side, someone we've not had on for a wee while, but delighted to have her back, is Ruth Watson from Keep Scotland the Brand. Ruth, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 285,907 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 267,598 were confirmed negative, 18,309 were positive. There are 7 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 today in Scotland. And today there has been 1 new death of someone who has tested positive reported. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all of those with symptoms will necessarily be tested. Although if you are showing symptoms, you absolutely should book a test as soon as possible. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 358 people in hospital last night, 3 of whom were in intensive care, with another 8 in intensive care with suspected COVID-19. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,490. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 44,517 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness, an increase of 126. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we also have our National Records of Scotland update. And as at the 5th of July, there were 4,173 deaths registered in Scotland where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, an increase of 17 deaths from the previous week, according to statistics published today by National Records of Scotland. From the 29th of June to the 5th of July, 40 fewer deaths from all causes were registered compared with the average for the time of year. This is the second week in a row that the total number of deaths registered has been lower than the average. New analysis of deaths registered up to the 14th of June shows that deaths among people from the South Asian ethnic group were almost twice as likely to involve COVID-19 than deaths in the white ethnic group, after accounting for age group, sex, area deprivation, and urban and rural classification. And before we go on to our main stories of the day, I would just like to remind you, if you want to join us here in the conversation, you can do that if you follow us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, and then use the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag Scotland AT and the number 7. We will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. Our first story this evening, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, today announced his plans to restart the UK economy. Key measures include a job retention bonus of £1,000 for every worker returning to work after furlough, and VAT in the food and hospitality sectors is to be cut from 20% to 5% to boost that struggling sector. There will also be a kickstart scheme to pay the wages of young workers for 6 months, and companies will also receive a £2,000 payment for each new apprentice they take on. A £2 billion pot for retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient will also be made available in the form of vouchers worth £5,000 to £10,000 to less well-off families. Families across the UK will also receive a voucher entitling each person to up to £10 off a restaurant meal between Monday and Wednesdays during August. And in England, stamp duty has been slashed, with the threshold rising from £125,000 to £500,000. Some of the plans have been welcomed, but numerous critics have pointed out that a voucher for a half-price meal is of little use to people already struggling to put food on the table at home, while cutting stamp duty will only lead to drastic house price inflation, which creates no real benefit for wider society. Scottish Finance Secretary Kate Forbes said, "Overall, this package is a huge opportunity missed. It falls well short of delivering what is needed to boost the economy and protect jobs. There is no new capital spend, no extension to the furlough scheme for hard-hit sectors, and no further support for households in financial difficulty. A half-price meal out does not help those struggling to put food on the table." SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Thulis commented that the Kickstart scheme was a kick in the teeth to young workers if it did not include an increase on the reduced minimum wage for younger people. She also pointed out that the plan did nothing to lift people out of poverty, as the SNP's proposed emergency basic income would. Scottish Green co-leader Patrick Harvey said, "Investment in energy efficiency and greener homes is absolutely vital, but there are problems of both scale and delivery. The £2 billion Green Homes Grant scheme must be seen alongside the £28 billion road building programme and the £10 billion annual subsidy for the fossil fuel industry. Delivering through a voucher system might work in some places, but across swathes of Scotland where tenements and flats are the norm, this individual approach will fail. Buildings need to be treated as a whole, and no voucher scheme can achieve that." So, Andrew, coming to you first, what was your reaction to the Chancellor's statement this afternoon? Was there anything that jumped out as you as particularly positive or negative?
Well, Kenny, I haven't had an opportunity to look at it in detail. I heard some of the statement when it was being given live, and I've heard some of the feedback and responses we've seen in the press today. I think certainly one can detect the hand of the Treasury at the back of this, as ever. The Treasury are notoriously unwilling to be expansive and to extend plans in an enthusiastic and a positive manner, no matter the circumstances. So I think we're seeing a little bit of there will have been. I think it's clear there have been a range of ideas have been considered and have been put forward from a range of different sources. The Treasury have cheese pared and salami sliced on each of those different component parts, and I think that that is likely to lead to what Kate Forbes has predicted and has described this proposal as a huge opportunity missed. And I think it blunts the prospects of success of any of those individual component parts, because their ability to cut through is removed. You can't unspend your way out of trouble in circumstances like this. There's a requirement to be bold and to do what needs to be done. And here we're seeing a percentage of what needs to be done, not all of it. So there are some interesting ideas, there are some components, but as you've just said, there are the hoary old examples that you would expect from a Tory administration, reducing taxes on the rich through the raising the floor for stamp duty in England and Wales, and very, very little for those who are at the real sharp end. We know that, amongst other things, the current crisis has taught us that the wealthiest have escaped to their second or third homes. The middle classes have covered at home, working from home because they can, and those who are in the working classes, or those who are least well off, they've been on the front line all the way through this, either working or surviving, and that continues. I think we've seen no shift in the emphasis from the Tory government today.
Mm-hmm. And Ruth, what about you? What did this statement say to you?
Well, I couldn't really understand quite where he was going with it. On the one hand, Rishi Sunak, he strikes me, I don't know if any of you have ever watched In-Betweeners, but he sort of strikes me as one of those characters, just sort of lots of boyish enthusiasm and seems to want to be liked, but he seems to want to be liked by everybody and therefore delivers nothing of real substance. The furlough scheme was a really good idea and has been well executed for many, not for all. I've just come back from a meeting at the local community food hub, and they're doing deliveries to folk with 2 Audis in the driveway, but people who their money's all tied up in business or investments, and they can't do their work because they're self-employed or they're entrepreneurs, and they suddenly are having that real leveling experience of having assets, but everything's tied up. So they may have all the trappings of wealth and be the kind of person that Rishi Sunak is perhaps hoping to entice with these meal vouchers, but that makes no difference if you've got no money to go out for a meal in the first place. You can't even afford to put food on your table and you're getting food parcels. Then I don't quite know who it is he's doing this for. And when he came out a couple of weeks ago and said, we've got to spend to save the economy, and I watched all these folk heading out like so many sheep being herded to a viral slaughter. drink Britain back to prosperity. What is he thinking of? So on the one hand, I understand that he has been a man who has been put in an invidious position. And I think that he has tried to do what he can with the policies that he holds. I think he is spectacularly missing the point. And if you're having a green economy, you cannot get up and start talking in frequent interviews I've seen him giving about Britain is a nation of consumers and we've got to get back to consuming to save the economy. What about not consuming to save the planet? And what about looking at new ways of doing things, which are actually pretty much the old ways of doing things up until about the 1950s or 60s? So we're getting back to people understanding the value of money and the value of maintaining our resources. And with Brexit coming, we shouldn't be being encouraged to go out and spend to save the economy. We should be having a really good, long, hard look at what our priorities are. I really want to support my local community. I really want to support my local eateries. But quite frankly, until I am certain that there's a really good chance I'm not getting coronavirus with my burger, I'm unlikely to go and eat out. And Scotland is getting to that point now where we could think that perhaps we can go out and start trying to get back to normal. I want my youngest to go back to school in August. But if we keep getting high risk behaviours presented to us, as I'm watching happen in England, I'm not sure that Rishi Sunak's dreams are going to come to anything, because I think that we're looking at a series of second waves that's going to smash the English economy and may well have reverberations which hit Scotland.
And Andrew, there's something else about this statement that interested me. The British government has tended to try and push the recovery onto people rather than onto the public sector. For example, we saw Boris Johnson blaming care homes for not doing things properly. He stopped doing his daily briefings and basically said, this is up to you now to take care of, while there's still very high prevalence of the virus. In this statement, we've seen Rishi Sunak talk about doubling the number of job coaches in job centres, at the same time as winding down the furlough scheme, as if to incentivise people to get back to work because they're going to have less money, when clearly that's not how this is working. I mean, people, for example, in the theatre sector are not going to be able to get back to work for a long time yet, regardless of how little support they get from the furlough scheme. What do you make of this kind of individualisation of the problem that the Tories seem determined to do?
Well, it doesn't come as much of a surprise, Kenny. I certainly heard Lord Lamont, the former Chancellor, talking about how he didn't agree with the idea that state capital investment in infrastructure and infrastructure projects would be a sensible way of proceeding. He felt that the private sector should be left to the private sector and they would see their way through, which is nonsense, but it's not a surprise. So I think, and reflecting on what Ruth was saying, yes, I think Sunak does present a little bit like a character from the Inbetweeners. However, with one important caveat, he's a character from the Inbetweeners whose father-in-law is a billionaire, which I suspect, I get the slight impression that may be shaping his worldview and his view of the way in which people are making their way through the current crisis. He has no concern about putting food on his table, and there's a distinct impression here that he and this government aren't bothered about the people who can't put food on their table. I get the distinct impression that their perspective is one of the extremely wealthy and those who really don't mind and don't care. So I think it's not a surprise, and I think that there are likely to. I'm very concerned. Firstly, as Ruth was saying, this notion that people should eat and drink their way out of a problem, which seems a little bit strange, and I think there's a significant risk that as people start to go hungry, which is what we're talking about here. As people start to go hungry, people start to get very angry. The two things follow quite close together. So I am concerned that in some sections of society, especially in England and Wales, but we'll see in Scotland too, that the manner in which the the various schemes that had been put in place are being ended early, is likely to exacerbate the problem and is likely to cause more problems rather than solve any problems.
Well, we have seen that not every sector is going to be helped equally, and the SNP has criticised the Chancellor for refusing to outline any targeted measures or support package for Scotland and the UK's struggling oil and gas sector, warning that the Treasury's silence would deliver a hammer blow to the industry and economy. In the fiscal statement, Rishi Sunak failed to outline a single measure to help tackle the challenges facing the industry due to the coronavirus pandemic and the subsequent hit to oil prices, with some firms already setting out mass job losses. The Chief Executive of Oil and Gas UK has previously warned that the industry's position is paper thin as the impact of low oil prices and the coronavirus pandemic are felt. And Ruth, this is a really difficult one because we know that we're going to have to reduce our dependence on oil very rapidly over the next few years. But at the same time, it's a huge part of the economy in places like Aberdeen especially. And with the enormous drop in demand for oil during lockdown, we've seen the oil price crash, and that has a massive impact on jobs in the sector. Do you think we should be looking at something to prop the oil and gas sector up in the short term?
Well, first of all, I have to declare an interest. My husband is a quality systems engineer working with the oil and gas industry for the last few years, and he's lost his job. And so we are one of those groups of people, because his job was overseas, we weren't eligible for furlough. So we're one of those groups of people who are living off our savings. And with no prospect of work coming up in the near future. However, I'm torn because I do think that we're getting to a point, we're probably beyond the point where the stuff should be kept in the ground and we should be looking for other ways of doing things. However, we're not quite there yet because the alternatives have not been put into place in such a way that we can turn around tomorrow and walk into a world without oil where our infrastructure isn't there. However, if we don't come up with alternatives, then we run the future of a world without water or a world which is burning around us. So I'm, from an environmentalist point of view, I'm quite conflicted about it. I can see from personal experience that the downturn in oil and gas is having a massive impact on jobs and jobs in the kind of places you maybe wouldn't think. In Malaysia, where we worked for years, the downturn of oil, which Malaysia really relies on in a lot of ways. They've got extremely good petrochemical, really high quality petrochemicals, which actually goes for most of the airline industry. And that's a big deal for people in a country that doesn't have a social security system. So if you don't have food, you're in real trouble. So it's not just about places like Aberdeen that this has a knock-on effect. I think we need to find a global solution to a global problem with this. From a local point of view, I would like to see Scotland having the ability to develop renewables and to continue to work on being world leaders in the wave industry and the alternative sector. And I think that's a real thing. It's a real issue, is that we have so much potential, which for various reasons we aren't able to explore it fully. I would love to see a world in which my husband could put his extraordinary talents into working on renewables, and those opportunities are not quite there yet. So I don't know what the answer is, but I would really like to see a solution pretty quickly. I don't think the answer is just to push people off a cliff edge, but the way that the climate emergency is going, that cliff edge may be coming towards us in a great big tsunami type wave, and we're guddling about worrying about about a £10 voucher, and there may well be a climate emergency coming, which is going to make that look like a happy memory.
Well, Well, speaking of the situation in Scotland specifically, the SNP has said that the Tory government is threatening Scotland's recovery after the Chancellor refused to extend the furlough scheme and failed to give a commitment to devolving crucial financial powers to the Scottish Parliament. Responding to the fiscal statement, Ian Blackford MP warned that the Tories were putting people's jobs and livelihoods on the line by cutting off the job retention scheme and the self-employment income support scheme too soon. The SNP Westminster leader said the Tory government was leaving the Scottish Parliament to tackle the unprecedented economic crisis with one hand tied behind its back by withholding the financial powers requested by the Scottish government to secure a strong recovery in Scotland. Mr Blackford added that the statement was a missed opportunity to put fairness at the heart of the recovery, with the Tory government failing to invest in tackling soaring levels of child poverty and failing to deliver a major boost to NHS and social care funding by refusing to match the higher levels of per-head spending in Scotland, which would have delivered a £35 billion increase for NHS England and a £4 billion increase for NHS Scotland. And Andrew, this discussion over fiscal powers for the Scottish government to handle this crisis in its own way have been a constant kind of drumbeat throughout the crisis, going back to the middle of March. Do you see any prospect of that changing now with this protest from Ian Blackford?
Well, certainly, Kenny, you're right. I think I can recall you and I discussing this specific issue at least twice in the last few months. Mm-hmm. So the background here, I think it's pretty clear. And just to follow on from the conversation we were having with regard to the oil industry, I think I've seen discussions today pointing out that with the success that there has been so far in moving to a renewable and a low carbon energy generation process in the UK and Scotland in particular, that there's no need really to be building nuclear power plants at the moment either. But putting that to one side, I think it is becoming clearer and clearer, and the oil industry is a very good example, that I could very easily see a set of circumstances where if a Scottish government had the borrowing powers that it has requested, it would be able to continue to invest more heavily into the decarbonisation of our economy and the redirection of the offshore oil sector in particular in Scotland into activities and projects which are no or low carbon and are the way forward. But we know that the Westminster government set its face against all of that, both when Theresa May came to power and also at the last general election as well. They say great things about it and then do nothing, because we know where the investment into to politicians comes from, and it's at least in part from the oil industry. So the opportunity is being wasted in two ways. Firstly, the opportunity for the Scottish Government to do what it said it wants to do, which is to invest and promote more heavily and faster the redirection of the offshore oil industry into more future-proofed and forward-looking activities, and also the opportunity to enhance and so there's a structural benefit there, but also there's a strategic benefit there. There's also a tactical benefit insofar as there would be an ability to encourage manufacturing and production jobs across Scotland as that transformation in the industry took place. Now, on reflection as well, it strikes me that I think about it a little bit that much of Rishi Sunak's announcement today has, and this comes as no surprise, has been written with the front page of the Daily Mail and the Sun in mind. Nothing more than that. The summer statement has been made not with the purpose of alleviating people's hardship or of supporting the UK economy or the economies of the constituent parts of the UK. It has been drafted in order that it's been written by journalists and former columnists who are a significant part of the cabinet. It's been written by them in order to capture tomorrow's headlines. And given that fish and chip shops are open, if they're tomorrow's headlines, then it's the following day's fish and chip paper. There is, as Ruth was saying, there's a distinct lack of substance around any of this. It's all about headlines. So, insofar as the Scottish Government and Ian Blackford in Westminster are talking about strategic investments and strategic progress, and Westminster is interested only in tomorrow's headlines, we're not going to see any change in direction from them, not at all.
Well, we move now to a story about which I'm sure Ruth will have plenty to say. The Scottish Government has expressed grave concern over the UK Government's plan to impose rules on the so-called UK internal market on the devolved nations. Michael Russell has written to Michael Gove with two major concerns. Firstly, the UK Government has proposed establishing an unelected external body which would be able to determine whether Scottish Government legislation passed a new test regarding its impact on the UK internal market. This body, appointed by UK ministers without reference to the devolved governments, would thus be able to block Scottish Government legislation if it felt that such legislation would create different standards in different parts of the UK. Mr. Russell pointed out that if such a body already existed, it could potentially have blocked popular and successful policies like the removal of tuition fees, the ban on smoking in public places, and the recent introduction of minimum unit pricing on alcohol. Secondly, the UK Government has proposed a mutual recognition scheme which would force devolved governments to automatically accept changes in regulatory standards in another part of the UK, meaning that, for example, the UK Government could lower food standards in England with an eye on a trade deal with the US, and Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland would have no option but to accept these changes. Mr. Russell noted that both changes were a serious threat to the normal functioning of devolved government and would force all parts of the UK to accept the lowest common denominator, rather than each having competing ambitions for higher standards, with EU law setting a floor on all changes. And Ruth, this is obviously something that you, with your Keep Scotland the Brand campaign, have been kind of raising the alarm bells about for a long time, but now we see this actual proposal from the UK government. What's been your reaction?
Well, as you can imagine, I am fulminating with rage. I'm pleased to see that Michael Russell is taking such strong action about it. I think, as we have seen with the public health emergency with coronavirus, that it is not Scotland, it is not Wales, it is not Northern Ireland which is out of lockstep on this, it is the English administration. And I think that this is something which we are seeing more and more. So the Welsh and the Irish are very strong on the need to maintain convergence rather than divergence with European standards. For the Northern Irish, that is of particular importance because of the island-wide issue. For example, with the deals that there are with Irish dairy and the PGI that the Irish have, which see so much trade deals happening between the North and the Republic of Ireland, for example, to do with making their Irish cream coffee liqueurs. So there are huge issues to do with food and drink and with food standards, and the ongoing ramifications and the significantly wider implications which goes into, I mean, basically this is what some have termed the power grab from Westminster, finally being challenged. And by finally, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, or a critical way. It is, at last, we are seeing some action about it, and the timing probably is the right kind of timing, because you have to wait until you see what's been coming, and that really wasn't clear until the EU extension deadline passed, so that we now can see that the administration in Westminster is heading for Brexit regardless of a deal, and the implications for that are so significant that if the Scottish Government doesn't act now, then not only is our Scotland's democratic principles being put at risk, but our economic underpinning, everything which underpins our economy in terms of quality, in terms of the trade deals that we currently enjoy. And if you've been watching any of the Select Committee interviews and evidence that's been given, there was a recent one from Scottish farming and food and drink leaders, and I don't think I've ever seen them looking so worried about what the no deal Brexit, what the low deal contracts that Westminster seems determined to pursue, the implications of that starkly before us. I don't think I've ever seen those really solid, business people looking desperately concerned and giving really quite alarming evidence about what it means. So I'm really pleased to see that Mr. Russell is pursuing this on behalf of the Scottish Government. And when I see headlines saying that Boris Johnson's going to put the Vicks inhaler up the Welsh dragon's nose, you can see that it's not personal to Scotland. This is the neoliberals in Westminster seem to have some kind of, I don't know what it is with them, but they just seem so determined to commit some kind of kamikaze deal with America in particular, and everybody else. I mean, for us to end up at the same level in terms of trade as North Korea and Somalia, which is what we're heading towards if we get to a no-deal Brexit, to me it just seems bizarre. We would be the United Kingdom, if we get what Westminster is looking for, the United Kingdom's trade status would be below that of Bangladesh in terms of trade deals and strength. And that's really not the position I thought we were going to be in.
Yeah, well, on that note, the SNP has criticised the UK government's reported decision to nominate disgraced former Tory Cabinet Minister Liam Fox as the new head of the World Trade Organization. It comes after Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary, reportedly ruled out backing the UK's other candidate, Peter Mandelson, most likely to receive backing from other EU countries because he was not a Brexiter. Fox, who is an ardent Brexiteer, was previously forced to resign as Defence Secretary over claims he broke the ministerial code after allowing a close friend and lobbyist to benefit from access to key government meetings with foreign officials and defence contractors, despite holding no official government role. He was also condemned for comments at an event for right-wing Tory activists that the UK was too lazy and too fat, criticising businesses across the UK. The former cabinet minister, who was also sacked as International Trade Secretary, once boasted that the UK would secure 40 trade deals the second after the UK leaves the EU in March 2019 without any disruption. Instead, the Brexit deadline was extended and the UK has only managed to roll over a small percentage of existing trade deals, raising concerns over Fox's understanding of trade talks and his suitability for the WTO role. Andrew, do you think Liam Fox is the right man to be running world trade?
No, Kenny, I don't. I'm well aware of his family and the Borders, who are lovely people. He is not. He, apart from the problems of his dishonesty and his undependability when he's in a ministerial position, there is the other concern, especially in the context of the WTO, which is that, as we well know, Dr. Fox has been so deeply for such a long time in bed with extreme right-wingers in the United States of America. He's part of a number of right-wing organizations, political organizations in the US, and it is pretty clear that if he was unfortunate enough to cut himself, he would be red, white and blue, but it would be the Star-Spangled Banner. It wouldn't be anything from this side of the Atlantic. He is not a man to be trusted in any context, and certainly not with trade. With Trump still in the administration in the US, the notion that Liam Fox would be in any way a fit and proper person to represent UK, let alone Scotland, it's beyond description. And I think it's important also, following on from the points that were just being made, I think we are seeing a government at the moment in Westminster which is as a matter of policy and determination is assaulting and attacking the institutions which underpin the devolved settlement in the UK and underpin Scotland in many ways. Attacks on the powers of the Scottish Government, attacks on the very principles of devolution, and in the context of what we're talking about here, trade and the regulation of trade, both in the internal market in the UK and internationally, the notion that the Westminster Government is prepared to launch an attack on the Scottish institution of the whisky industry by potentially permitting the use of barley and grain which has been adulterated with GM and or excess pesticides those grains could be used in the production of Scottish whisky is an assault on the institution of the whisky industry as well. So I think in terms of the direction of travel from Westminster, it is a problem. I'm not surprised that they balked at Lord Mandelson being nominated. He was doing the round. I heard him doing the rounds on the BBC a couple of days ago, and it didn't sound like a great campaign he was running at the time, even though he is somebody who, as a former trade commissioner, actually has some relevant experience of trade, unlike Dr. Fox. But no, I think we are seeing determination from Westminster. Political appointees, no matter their ability or lack of ability. And in fact, there's probably a consistent pattern here. If you look at the quality and the abilities of the current Westminster cabinet, we're seeing it now in terms of their appointees into posts which are not in the cabinet, but which are but have some power and some importance elsewhere.
Mm. Well, speaking of future trade relationships, Germany will continue to push to seal a new partnership agreement with the UK by the end of the year. But the European Union should also prepare for an abrupt split from 2021, Chancellor Angela Merkel said today. The UK left the EU in January and is currently in a standstill transition period intended to give the two sides time to agree a new relationship on everything from trade to security cooperation. Last week's round of talks was cut short, with both sides saying that while they wanted an agreement, they had yet to overcome the gulf in positions that could see the UK leaving the transition period without a trade deal. British and EU officials meet in London this week for talks on goods, services, fisheries governance, the so-called level playing field guarantees of fair competition and law enforcement, after the two sides' negotiators had an informal dinner. Progress in negotiations thus far has been slim, to put it diplomatically, Merkel told the European Parliament as Germany assumed the EU's rotating presidency for the rest of this year. We have agreed with the UK to accelerate the pace of talks. I will continue to push for a good solution, but we should also prepare for the possibility of a no-deal scenario. And Ruth, I mean, Angela Merkel is not prone to, panic language. She's not prone to making extreme statements. But this is the second or third time recently that German officials have said we really need to be looking at the possibility of no deal. Do you think the kind of position of the EU is changing at all?
No, I think the EU are deeply pragmatic and they've seen it all before. I think what they have been surprised by, when you look at some of the interviews that Michel Barnier has given over the last few months, I think what they have been surprised about is the mendacity of the Westminster administration, where they have, where Michel Barnier has talked about conversations being had supposedly in good faith. He doesn't believe that the UK is acting in good faith because deals which the UK are signing up to and are suggesting, they are then breaking weeks later. I think that Boris Johnson is treating the European Union trade talks in the way that he's treated various former wives and partners, and telling them what they want to hear while doing some dirty business behind their backs and then walking off. Not to put too diplomatic point on it, I don't trust them at all, and so I think that actually the EU is wise. I think Angela Merkel is wise to look at the track record and to say this is just nonsense. You've got Boris Johnson today standing up in Parliament and saying that the Northern Ireland protocols will not be affected at all. Was it not a jot, not a tiddle, not a sausage, not a jot, not a tiddle, he said about the Northern Ireland Protocol when asked about it in Parliament. And on Twitter earlier on, there was a chap, David Hennig, who's an EU a former trade negotiator, I should say, and he was saying this is great, but it's not true. And it's so blatant now that they're just lying. They're just not telling the truth. You've got Liz Truss, a woman who has got, generally speaking, the intellectual capacity and charisma of excelled by my daughter's guinea pig, and she was writing to Gove and Sunak, apparently, according to Adam Payne of Business Insider, furious. Liz Truss gets it. If Liz Truss gets it, she's deeply concerned that what the UK, the promises the UK are making, are going to be challenged. They are vulnerable to WTO challenges by other countries. The UK government is not behaving with any credibility And this has been anticipated. I mean, I was at a Brexit brunch 2 years ago at Edinburgh University, talking to some of the WTO trade negotiators, and they had slides up talking about the way that the negotiations were working, the policies. And two of the slides, one of the slides said unicorns. That was the title of the trade stance that the West was unicorns. And the next slide was called more unicorns. Really, we are in so much trouble. And most people don't even begin to realize it. I honestly, some nights I just don't sleep because I'm so worried about what's coming. So I'm really pleased to see that the Scottish government, the Welsh government, and Northern Ireland are looking really strongly at this and trying to hold England, Westminster rather, to account. And I think that the EU is very wise to be everything. If Boris Johnson told you that it was sunny outside, you take your umbrella. And I think Angela Merkel's very wise to be cautious.
Kenny, if I can step in for a moment and defend the honour of the guinea pigs of this world, the guinea pigs have many redeeming features. Something that they perhaps don't share with Liz Truss.
Fair enough. Well, still in Europe, and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić today called on protesters to stop attending anti-government rallies to avoid further spread of the coronavirus, warning there were no beds left in hospitals after dozens of demonstrators and police were hurt in overnight clashes. The violence in the capital, Belgrade, was triggered when a crowd stormed Parliament in protest at plans to reimpose a lockdown following a surge in COVID-19 cases. There are no free beds in our hospitals. We will open new hospitals, Vučić said in an address to the nation. He also accused far-right organisations and unspecified regional intelligence officials of staging riots to undermine Serbia's position. Serbian opposition parties and activists announced more protests in Belgrade later in the day. Footage showed police kicking and beating people with truncheons while protesters pelted officers with stones and bottles after thousands chanting for the resignation of Vučić gathered outside the Parliament building yesterday. Although he had said yesterday that a new lockdown would be imposed in Belgrade at the weekend, Vučić said today he had ultimately advised the government and health authorities not to introduce it, and that the government would announce a new set of sanitary measures tomorrow. Serbia, a country of 7 million, has reported 17,076 COVID-19 cases and 341 deaths. Health authorities say hospitals are running at full capacity and staff are exhausted. So, Andrew, what do you make of this reaction from the Serbian people to their a fairly authoritarian government suggesting they might reintroduce lockdown?
One thing struck me immediately with that story, Kenny, in the context of the health service and being under pressure and being at capacity. We have seen in the past the German state offer assistance to neighbouring countries to care for those who are suffering. And given that we have been lucky enough, and through hard work and perseverance, our SNHS is not under particular pressure at the moment, and indeed I think they're talking about moving different operations into Louisa Jordan in order to make use of some of the capacity there. I would like us to be thinking very seriously about extending assistance to the Serbian health service in terms of caring for and looking after those who may need care and assistance if their own health service is under pressure. Having said that, I think the rather veiled reference to regional intelligence officers doesn't come as a huge surprise. The malign influence of Russia and Russian intelligence in destabilising European countries, up to a point, including the UK, is well documented now and well recognised. And I would be surprised if there weren't representatives of the FSB or other security organisations from Russia involved, at least in part, in agitating and destabilising the population in Serbia. I'm not at all surprised that in most nations, the atmosphere is unsurprisingly difficult. It's a little fractious, it's a little febrile, and people are very concerned. So I would certainly think that in the current climate, it is perhaps particularly easy to foment upset and insurrection and disobedience and confrontation. And so I'm not surprised that in a country so close to Russia, that these problems are beginning to emerge. And I only wish that we could, from a Scottish perspective, that we, and I'm suggesting that we should do more to help in a practical sense to see if we can help take a bit of the heat out of the situation.
Well, speaking of travel between Scotland and Europe, passengers arriving in Scotland from 57 overseas destinations that have similar or lower levels of coronavirus infection than Scotland will no longer need to quarantine. Travellers from the 14 UK overseas territories will also be exempt. This public health measure will be lifted on Friday for those arriving from countries and territories where the risk of importing COVID-19 is sufficiently low, with 26 European nations among them, including Cyprus, France, Germany, Greece, Italy and Malta. However, Spain is excluded since the prevalence of COVID-19 there is thought to be around 10 times that in Scotland. Passengers arriving from these countries will still be required to complete the online passenger locator from prior to travel and to supply contact details, travel details, and the address of the final destination where they will be staying. Travellers arriving into Scotland via an English port or airport or direct to the country will still need to quarantine if they have been in a country which is not on the exemption list. A further review will be conducted on the 20th of July. And Ruth, this is a discussion that's been going on for a few days now. First Minister got the list of countries from the British government quite late, said she didn't have time to analyse them in time to make this announcement in tandem with the UK government, but now has made the announcement with some slight differences, obviously the most notable being Spain. What do you make of this from the Scottish Government today?
I think that the Scottish Government has been behaving with remarkable prudence and maturity and caution, as one would hope one's government would, given the state of the public health emergency. Scotland has managed to get our rate of infection and the resulting rate of death and ongoing ill health which comes about from COVID infection. We've managed to get that down, and that's been done on a community-wide effort. We've all played a part in it, and for that to be sabotaged or not sabotaged, but to be undermined by people wanting to go on holiday or by people travelling for business or even to see family, I'm not buying it. I am so pleased to see that there is caution. I completely get that if people are travelling from countries where the incidence is low, then it's probably not much different. The risk is probably not much different from me, for example, getting a bus from here to Stranraer or up to Caithness. However, I am not going to be getting a bus to Stranraer or to Caithness unless I really, really had to. And I think that's the thing. I have real issues with people in other countries trying to encourage folk to go off on holiday, and I note that the First Minister is urging Scots to have staycation. Quite frankly, Rishi Sunak can stuff his £10 voucher. I would much rather that somebody went to go on a wee holiday up to a yurt in a local field, and you don't get much more socially distanced when you're looking out on the llamas. But it's the thought that people still don't get it. They still don't get that actually things have to change. We have to change our behaviours. Until a vaccine is found, we have to change our behaviours in order to stay as safe as possible. And if that means people on a plane filling out a form, I was living in Asia when the swine flu hit. In fact, we had to quarantine because some of my family members got swine flu. It was really bad, and it was really scary. But actually, Malaysia was one of those Asian countries where people dealt really, really well with it. In the UK, we like to think that we're really sort of civilized and really developed. Asia, as a developing country, and all the countries around it, they dealt really, really well. There was community cohesion. People understood if you get ill, you can die. And we don't want infection to run rampant through our communities. So people wore masks. People practiced good hygiene. When we went in or out, when we had to travel, we went in and out, that there were people, when you were coming into the country, there were people taking your temperature. You had to fill out a form. Everybody was filling out a form so that everybody knew where you were going when you were on the plane coming over. You filled out contact details, and it was really done well. And for the UK to still 3 or 4 months down the road only now be getting this sorted out, to me it's absolutely mind-boggling. I've got friends in Asia who cannot believe what a rubbish job the UK has done of this. So I'm really pleased to see that the First Minister yet again is looking at the public health aspect and saying, first things first, let's save lives, let's get our kids back to school safely, let's try and open up our economy safely, and if you want to go and get a suntan, quite frankly, get a grip.
Well, we move now from the coronavirus to another tragedy, and the fire engineer on Grenfell Tower did not look at plans showing the building might be wrapped in aluminium cladding panels before advising that the works would not increase the risk of fire spreading across the building. Appearing at the public inquiry into the disaster that killed 72 people, Terry Ashton, a senior associate at fire engineer Exova, was asked if he created a false sense of security in the design team after he admitted he did not look at plans emailed to him about overcladding the building in 2012 before giving his advice. Ashton's role was to advise on the fire safety of the refurbishment and its compliance with building regulations. In October 2012, he was sent a detailed design report spelling out plans to overclad the building, possibly with aluminium panels. It included plans and sections showing how the cladding would be fixed and a detailed diagram of the build-up of the cladding system, showing the insulation and existing building. But he did not open it. Ashton said he did not know about plans to clad the building and that he did not look at the designs as he was not specifically asked to, although the email shown to the inquiry appears to show he was asked to by the architect. He said his decision not to look at the plans was partly because they are very lengthy documents. Andrew, this is a horrible tragedy, and I can't help thinking of the film The Towering Inferno, where just carelessness, thoughtlessness, not paying attention to detail ended up costing lives. What do you make of this from the inquiry about Grenfell?
Well, I think we've with the inquiries ongoing, so we've only heard partial evidence so far, and I think it might suit some people that a witch hunt develops in respect of one individual carrying the can for this. I suspect there's a little bit more. I suspect there's rather a lot more to it than that. Certainly, in the context of the broader legislative framework that the contractors were operating in at the time, and the financial pressures that were being imposed upon them by the borough, it's not a surprise that people were acting in ways that, with hindsight, they might now think that they would act in a different way. We know that the coalition government at that time had embarked upon what it had proudly entitled, and again with hindsight it tells us exactly, they had proudly embarked on a bonfire of regulations, and that included reducing the building regulations relating to the fireproofness or otherwise of cladding on multi-storey buildings. If I recall correctly, it was a Lib Dem minister who was responsible for that at the time in the coalition. So I think that individuals are now, with hindsight, reflecting that they would have done things differently doesn't come as a surprise. I think we will. I strongly think that we will find that there are it's a combination of circumstances rather than one individual fault by one individual person that led to the nature of the fire and the death toll that unfolded that resulted directly from that. However, it should encourage us to think, and without being exceptional about this, given that building regulations in Scotland this ties us back to a story at the top of the show. Given that building regulations are devolved, and building regulations in Scotland have always, since the notion of building regulations began, have always been tighter and more strict in Scotland than they are in England. Are we about to see circumstances where, for testing the alleged internal market in the UK, Scottish building regulations are reduced at the demand of an unelected Quango set up by Boris, and that as a result we are more likely to see the horrific events such as unfolded at Grenfell happening here. I think that's a very telling and a very pointed example of what it is that Westminster is threatening to embark upon.
Yeah, and as Andrew said, the inquiry obviously is ongoing. It's only just actually restarted since being suspended during lockdown. So we will continue to keep an eye on that. Ruth, what do you think about this story?
I, like Andrew, I'm very loath to see the deaths of all those people and an institutional issue being pinned on one person's appalling carelessness. If this gentleman's job, if this gentleman's job was to verify the safety from a fire perspective, a fire officer's perspective, and he didn't even bother to open the attachment, that seems to be a significant failing of his duty. I suspect he didn't open it because he probably had lots of other things to do, because he was probably overworked and there sort of forced errors occur. But you can't excuse somebody not doing their job if their job is to protect safety. I've been concerned all along by the implication that Grenfell was a problem because of the fire service, whereas it was predominantly a problem of the local council, who were cutting costs and making bad choices over a hand over fist. The fact that there's still cladding like this across England, and there are a few buildings in Scotland that have this kind of cladding too, although I am given to understand that the circumstances of the building are different, and that makes all the difference. And I'm not a fire officer, so I don't know. But the fact that there's cladding like this in buildings across England goes to show it's not just down to one fire officer. So it seems to me that there's a broader problem. And I also know, I've listened to a few programmes on Radio 4 about this, with people in the buildings being told that they themselves the owners have to pay to get the cladding removed, because most of the companies that put up this cladding have folded and gone into administration or sort of disappeared, so that they can't then be held liable. And it seems to me, if you've got a government that's prepared to bail out bankers and throw billions at a railway to nowhere, that's going to, why not? Let's just stop HS2 in Hinkley Point, and how about we sort out quite a few of our social issues? Let's get the cladding off these buildings. Let's just do things a bit better and stop all these. Well, how about we get Jacob Rees-Mogg to pay his personal taxes or his business taxes? George Osborne's dad, Let's get some taxing done of the people that should be paying it. All their money, all bet with their money stashed out in Panama. Let's get all that sorted out. We can get the cladding off, let people sleep at night, and let's stop scapegoating fire officers.
Well, that's certainly an idea. Our final story this evening. Advice for people who are shielding is to change in the coming month. Those affected will receive a letter from the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Gregor Smith, outlining new guidelines and the work to be done to move to pausing shielding from the 1st of August, as long as the evidence is clear that it is safe to do so. From 10th of July, those shielding will no longer need to physically distance from the people they live with. From that date, they can meet in groups of up to 8 people outdoors, from 2 other households in a single day, as long as strict hand hygiene and physical distancing advice is followed. Those who have been advised to shield will also be able to travel further than 5 miles from their house, book places to stay, such as self-catering accommodation without shared facilities, and use toilets in other people's houses if they are meeting them outdoors. Those currently shielding can also form an extended household group with one other household, meaning that the shielding group can visit one other household indoors and stay overnight without physical distancing. The decision on whether infection levels are low enough to allow shielding to be paused from the 1st of August will be announced before the end of July. Further advice on going back to work and whether children who are shielding can return to school will also be issued before the end of the month. Ruth, do you know anybody who's been shielding? Have you heard how they're feeling about this change in the guidance?
None of my personal family are shielding, but I've been one of the phone volunteers that's been. I've been really impressed with the way that our communities across Scotland have been coping with this, and here in Angus and Kirriemuir, we've had a really lovely, one of the nice things to come out of this awful situation has been the way that the community has responded. So the Angus volunteers have got together. There's a coordinator. I'm a phone volunteer. And I take phone calls from people who are shielding, and I pass it on to the person who goes to get their messages or their prescriptions. And so I'm a phone befriender, as you can imagine, somebody who likes to talk as much as I do. I'm quite happy to sit and chat to folk who are shielding. And it's been very interesting. So people obviously are anxious about it, but they also are. The overwhelming sense I get from the conversations I have with many of those who are shielding is that they are glad that they live in a community where people are looking out for each other. And so the stress and anxiety that they feel is mitigated by the sense of being cared for by a wider community, even those people who don't know you. And again, in Kirriemuir, we're very lucky because most people have got a wee patch of garden or have got some outdoor space that they can get to. So people haven't had the same pressures which many folk in the cities will have had, where you know, if you go out, then there is huge anxiety. But most folk that I know of who are shielding can at least go and sit in a bit of garden and get some fresh air. But yes, there's been a lot of anxiety, and people. I'm actually getting fewer phone calls now because people are feeling that they can go out a bit more and their families can interact with them a bit more. But there's certainly that sense that they don't want to go out until they know that everyone's wearing masks. They don't want to go out until things are a wee bit tighter. And I actually don't know anybody that's thinking that. You know, we're out of the woods, but for sure, there's a lot of people really looking forward to standing in the garden and chatting to family. So it's been a really difficult time, but in communities where community cohesion has come to the fore, the people that I'm aware of that are shielding have found it bad but not dire, if that makes sense.
And Andrew, what about you? Have you spoken to anybody who's in this position?
I have, and I do regularly. And I think, as we've said in other contexts, we know that the act of locking down was dramatic, but it was relatively straightforward. It was a binary black and white approach, and in particular with regard to those who were required to shield. Unlocking, on the other hand, is a progression. It's a pathway. It's a route, and it has a number of steps in it. So I know that. Certainly that a number of people who are shielding are listening very attentively to what the First Minister and the interim CMO are saying, but there is a risk of confusion because of these repeated steps and the careful unlocking. But I think that is the right way to go about it. The First Minister has spoken this week about how, and Jason Leitch has also spoken about how we need to introduce ideas to people, have them understand them and begin to implement them gently and carefully and thoughtfully. And that then allows people to gain confidence in the progress that's being taken and confidence in stepping back outside, because as Ruth is absolutely right, there are many people who are shielding of all ages who are understandably very concerned about re-engaging with the outside world if the outside world is not sending positive, constructive messages back by, for example, the wearing of masks in enclosed spaces. And until the people who are shielding see that, they receive those messages, I think they will be concerned. So there is progress being made here, but it's not a simple task. And I think we need to continue thinking and doing what we can to support and to understand and also to support those who have been shielding in our communities, just as Ruth says.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the issue with masks, we wear masks to protect other people, not necessarily to protect ourselves. And it is up to all of us, I think, to make it possible for our friends who have been through shielding, which has been a really traumatic experience for a lot of people. It's up to us to make the country as safe as we can for them. And speaking of people who are vulnerable, I just want to send a wee word to Maggie Lennon. Those of you who've been watching the show for a while will know Maggie. She's been a regular host back before she became ill. She had surgery yesterday. The surgery seems to have been a success. She's been moved out of intensive care. She's still in high dependency, but she is sitting up in bed and having interesting conversations through her drug-induced haze. So we send out our very best wishes to Maggie. We're dying to see her back here as soon as she is back to full fitness. So Maggie, do please get well soon. But that is all we've got time for this evening. So thank you, obviously, to Andrew and to Ruth. They're always a pleasure to speak to. And thank you to you at home for joining us as well. There wouldn't be any point in making the shows if you weren't here to watch them. We have to ask, if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up there as a supporter. Your £5 a month makes all the difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. It costs money to make TV. It costs money just to keep the lights on, to keep our equipment running here. So do please, if you can afford it, then support us through that link. If you can't afford it, then please don't feel bad about it. We've talked over and over again on the show about how much difficulty a lot of people are having on low incomes, reduced incomes through this crisis. But you can still help us by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, finding us on Facebook, and sharing the shows around. We don't have a budget for marketing at the moment until we get more people donating. So if you are able to spread the word around, word of mouth is the best possible way for us to spread the word on what Broadcasting Scotland is and what we do here. Let people know why you watch the shows and encourage them to try it out. Maybe one of them will then be able to donate, and that helps us keep going. And as well, as I always say, we do need more bodies here at Broadcasting Scotland. There's a lot of work to be done if we're going to develop into the kind of broadcaster that Scotland deserves. So if you have any interest in getting involved here, whether you have skills already or whether you're just an enthusiastic amateur, please do get in touch with us. There's lots of opportunities both behind and in front of the camera. We'd love to help you develop your skills or put unused skills to better use. So please do get in touch with us if there's anything that you'd like to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. But that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. Gordon will be back again tomorrow at 7. I'll be back again for the Full Scottish on Sunday. But until then, thanks once again to Andrew and Ruth. Thank you again for joining us and have a great evening. Good night.